Democracy, a system of government where power is vested in the people, either directly or through elected representatives, is one of the most influential and enduring political ideologies. Origins of democracy. Athens in the 5th century BCE is universally acknowledged as the cradle of democracy. The Athenian system of governance was a pioneering experiment in political equality and civic participation, established through the visionary reforms of leaders like Solon, Cleisthenes, and Pericles. Their contributions laid the foundations for democratic principles that continue to resonate in modern political systems. Solon's reforms, 594 BCE. Solon, an Athenian statesman, introduced a series of economic, political, and legal reforms aimed at diminishing the dominance of aristocracy and empowering ordinary citizens. He abolished debt slavery and created a more inclusive political structure by allowing broader participation in the government. His legal reforms included the establishment of courts, where citizens could appeal against the decisions of magistrates, ensuring a more equitable judicial process. Cleisthenes further transformed Athens's political landscape. He reorganized the citizenry into 10 tribes, breaking the power of traditional aristocratic families. Cleisthenes also established the Council of 500, a representative body chosen by lot, responsible for proposing legislation to the assembly. This reorganization promoted greater political engagement and fairness, paving the way for a more participatory form of government. Pericles' Golden Age, 461–429 BCE. Under the leadership of Pericles, Athenian democracy reached its zenith. The assembly, comprising all male citizens, became the cornerstone of governance, with decisions made through open debate and majority vote. Pericles expanded public participation and instituted state pay for public officials, enabling even the poorest citizens to serve in government roles. His era is marked by significant cultural and intellectual advancements, underscoring the synergy between democratic governance and societal flourishing. Mechanisms of Athenian democracy. The assembly, ecclesia. This was the principal body of Athenian democracy, where citizens could speak, debate, and vote on laws and policies. Participation was open to all male citizens, reflecting the democratic ideal of equal opportunity for involvement in public affairs. The Council of 500, Boule. This body prepared legislation for consideration by the assembly. Its members were chosen by lot, representing a cross-section of Athenian society and ensuring a broad base of input in the legislative process. The People's Court, Dicasteria. Citizens served as jurors in this judicial institution, which was integral to the Athenian legal system. The courts ensured that judicial decisions were made by the people, reflecting the democratic principle of popular sovereignty. Roman Republic, a republican democracy. The Roman Republic, established in 509 BCE, was another early model of democratic governance, characterized by a complex system of checks and balances designed to prevent any single individual or group from dominating the political landscape. Foundations of the Roman Republic, 509 BCE. The Roman Republic's political structure included several key institutions that distributed power among different branches of government. This system aimed to balance the influence of various social classes and regions within the Republic, promoting stability and inclusiveness. The Senate. Composed of Rome's elite, the Senate wielded substantial influence over legislation, foreign policy, and financial matters. While not an elected body, its members were typically experienced statesmen whose advisory role was crucial in shaping the Republic's policies. Popular assemblies. These were forums where Roman citizens could participate directly in governance. Assemblies elected magistrates, passed laws, and made critical decisions regarding war and peace. The assemblies provided a means for the citizenry to exercise their political rights and hold leaders accountable. Concepts of citizenship and rule of law. Roman citizenship. Over time, Roman citizenship expanded to include diverse populations within the Republic's growing territories. This inclusive approach helped integrate conquered peoples and maintain social cohesion, as citizenship conferred significant legal and economic benefits. Rule of law. The Roman legal system emphasized the principle that all citizens were subject to the same laws and entitled to the same legal protections. The codification of laws and the development of legal principles, such as the rights of individuals and the importance of due process, were fundamental to Roman governance and have had a lasting impact on legal systems worldwide. Medieval and Renaissance developments. In 1215, a group of rebellious English barons compelled King John to sign the Magna Carta, a document that significantly curtailed the powers of the monarchy and laid the groundwork for constitutional governance. This charter established the principle that the king was not above the law, a radical departure from the notion of absolute royal authority. Key provisions included the protection of certain individual rights and the stipulation that no free man could be imprisoned or stripped of his rights without due process. The Magna Carta is often heralded as a foundational document for constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy in England, influencing subsequent legal and political developments. The Renaissance and Enlightenment, seeds of modern democracy. The Renaissance was a period of profound cultural and intellectual rebirth, characterized by a renewed interest in the classical ideals of ancient Greece and Rome, including concepts of democracy and republicanism. This era saw the emergence of civic humanism, which emphasized the importance of active citizenship and public participation in governance. Scholars and philosophers during the Renaissance advocated for the engagement of citizens in political life, drawing inspiration from the democratic practices of Athens and the republican institutions of Rome. The Enlightenment was an intellectual movement that further advanced the ideas of democracy and individual rights. Enlightenment thinkers critically examined traditional authority and sought to establish principles of governance based on reason, equality, and justice. Their writings laid the intellectual foundation for modern democratic thought. John Locke. Locke's theories on natural rights and government by consent were revolutionary. He argued that all individuals possess inalienable rights to life, liberty, and property, and that legitimate government is based on the consent of the governed. Locke's ideas deeply influenced the development of liberal democracy and were pivotal in shaping the political philosophies of the American and French revolutions. Montesquieu. Montesquieu's seminal work, The Spirit of the Laws, introduced the idea of the separation of powers. He proposed dividing government into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial, to prevent any single entity from gaining too much power. This concept became a cornerstone of modern democratic systems, ensuring checks and balances within government structures. Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau advanced the notion of the general will and direct democracy in his work, The Social Contract. He argued that true democracy involves the collective decision-making of all citizens, and that government should reflect the general will of the people. Rousseau's emphasis on popular sovereignty and direct participation influenced various democratic movements and the development of participatory governance models. The rise of modern democracy. The American colony's quest for independence from British rule was driven by multiple grievances, most notably taxation without representation and a desire for self-governance. The colonies felt oppressed by British economic policies and the lack of a voice in Parliament. This discontent culminated in the Declaration of Independence in 1776, a document that not only declared the colony's separation from Britain, but also articulated fundamental principles of liberty and equality. It emphasized the right of people to overthrow a government that failed to protect their inalienable rights. The creation of the U.S. Constitution, 1787. Following the victory in the Revolutionary War, the fledgling nation faced the challenge of creating a sustainable government. The U.S. Constitution, drafted in 1787, established a federal republic characterized by a system of checks and balances. This framework was designed to ensure that no single branch of government, executive, legislative, or judicial, could dominate the others. To address concerns about individual rights, the Bill of Rights was added as the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, guaranteeing essential liberties such as freedom of speech, religion, and the press, as well as protections against arbitrary government actions. The French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, inspired by the ideals of the Enlightenment and the successful American Revolution, the French Revolution aimed to dismantle the absolute monarchy and establish a republic founded on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Enlightenment philosophers such as Rousseau and Montesquieu provided the intellectual underpinnings for the revolution, advocating for democratic governance and the protection of individual rights. Key events and outcomes. The National Assembly. Formed by representatives of the Third Estate, the National Assembly played a pivotal role in the early stages of the revolution. It abolished feudal privileges, thereby dismantling the ancient regime, and adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in 1789. This declaration proclaimed the equality of all men and asserted the rights to liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. Reign of Terror. The revolution entered a more radical phase with the Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794, a period characterized by political purges and widespread executions of perceived enemies of the revolution. Led by figures such as Maximilien Robespierre, the radical Jacobins sought to defend the revolution and establish the First French Republic. Despite its excesses, this period helped to solidify the revolutionary changes and pave the way for a republican form of government in France. Democracy in the 19th and 20th centuries. The 19th century in the United Kingdom saw a series of reform acts that progressively expanded the right to vote. The Reform Act of 1832 began the process by addressing the imbalances in representation and extending suffrage to more middle-class men. Subsequent acts in 1867 and 1884 further widened the electorate, including a significant portion of the working class. Parallel to these legislative changes, movements like the Chartists and the labor and suffrage movements played critical roles. The Chartists, active in the mid-19th century, demanded universal male suffrage and other democratic reforms. By the early 20th century, the suffragettes and suffragists were advocating for women's right to vote, leading to the Representation of the People Act of 1918, which granted voting rights to women over 30 and later to all women over 21 in 1928. United States, Civil War and Civil Rights. The American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, was a pivotal conflict that expanded the principles of democracy to include all citizens, regardless of race. The abolition of slavery, formalized by the 13th Amendment in 1865, was a significant step toward equality. This period also saw the introduction of the 14th and 15th Amendments, guaranteeing citizenship and voting rights to African American men. The struggle for democratic inclusivity continued into the 20th century, culminating in the women's suffrage movement. The 19th Amendment, ratified in 1920, granted women the right to vote, marking a major milestone in the fight for gender equality. Additionally, the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s led to significant legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which further secured voting rights for African Americans and other marginalized groups. The spread of democracy globally. The early 19th century was a period of intense revolutionary activity in Latin America, inspired by the democratic ideals of the American and French revolutions. Countries across the continent fought for and achieved independence from European colonial powers. Leaders like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín were instrumental in these struggles, advocating for republican forms of government. Despite challenges, these movements laid the foundations for democratic governance in the region. The 19th and early 20th centuries witnessed significant democratization across Europe. Nationalist movements sought to unify disparate regions under democratic ideals, while labor rights struggles pushed for broader political participation. The revolutions of 1848, although initially unsuccessful, set the stage for future reforms. By the early 20th century, many European countries had adopted democratic institutions, though these were often interrupted by the rise of totalitarian regimes. Decolonization and postcolonial democracies. The mid-20th century saw a wave of decolonization as African, Asian, and Middle Eastern nations gained independence from European powers. Leaders in these newly independent states often sought to establish democratic governments, drawing on anti-colonial sentiments and the principles of self-determination. Despite facing significant challenges, including economic instability and ethnic conflicts, many of these nations endeavored to build democratic institutions. The Cold War and the end of totalitarianism. The Cold War was characterized by the ideological struggle between democracy, led by the United States, and communism, led by the Soviet Union. This period saw various proxy wars and political contests as each side tried to expand its influence. Democratic nations promoted liberal democratic values, while communist countries advocated for a one-party system based on Marxist-Leninist principles. Fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union and the Communist bloc. The wall's destruction paved the way for German reunification and the spread of democratic governance across Eastern Europe. By 1991, the Soviet Union had collapsed, leading to the emergence of several independent republics that sought to establish democratic governments. This period marked a significant expansion of democracy as former communist states transitioned to democratic systems, embracing market economies and political pluralism.